Every house harbors the memories, hopes, and dreams of all who have lived in it and will live in it. Yet such a house in the small town of Jericho in the state of New York on the coast of Long Island B, in its basement concealed a dark secret of its owner that had gone unrevealed for 30 years. On September 2, 1999, the Long Island police received a call from an excited man who reported that he had found an old tank with remains in the basement of his house. When the officers arrived at the address, they approached the spacious house and were met by the shocked homeowner named Ronald K., who told them that he had gone to the basement to remove his personal belongings from the house that had been sold the day before and discovered that not all of the trash had been removed. In the corner stood, among other things, a large, dirty barrel. It was rusty and old, had a capacity of 55 gallons, and was covered with faded labels. A note attached to the barrel stated that the barrel was too heavy to transport and that because of its weight and the chemical markings, special equipment was required. Nevertheless, the movers carried the tank outside. The man decided to open the tank and inspect its contents. As soon as he opened the lid, a nauseating odor hit his nose, but that was not all. On the surface, he saw a dried leather hand and a woman's high-heeled shoes. The whole was covered in a heap of granular material and coated with a viscous, greenish chemical liquid. Cohen said he had lived in the house for 9 years and had never seen this tank before. It was obvious that what he saw made him uneasy, for he had lived in the house for more than years, and during all that time this tank had sat in the basement. The discovery did not arouse the police's suspicion. They searched the house and basement for clues to the incident, but by that time the tank had already been handled by many people and the police had no chance of finding the perpetrator's fingerprints. The only clue the investigators had was the tank itself and its contents. The tank was taken to a laboratory for analysis. It was immediately apparent that the tank was completely filled with small, pea-sized black and white plastic balls, which had to be scooped out of the barrel for several hours before the mummified remains could be fully excavated. Presumably, after the lid was closed, the oxygen was depleted, decomposition stopped, and a true mummy was formed. When the mummy was removed from the tank, it turned out to be a woman. She had dark hair below her shoulders, was of small stature, about 150 cm tall, and appeared to be between 25 and 35 years old. Strikingly, she had gold fillings in her 2 front teeth. Experts say such fillings were manufactured in Central America, so possibly the woman was Spanish. She was dressed in a leopard print faux fur coat and a floral patterned dress. On her feet, she wore woolen socks and shoes, the kind of clothing women wore in the 1960s and 1970s. But that was not all. The woman was 8 months pregnant. On the floor of the tank, the investigators found a viscous, green-tinted liquid, which later proved to be a mixture of bodily fluids and green paint. The police also found the woman's handbag, which contained her address book, a makeup kit, and a wallet with the business card of a long-retired doctor. Another strange find was a plastic stem with leaves, which also would play a role in the investigation. The handbag contained no identification but did contain a notebook. The book was badly damaged. Almost all entries had been erased or smeared, and it was decided to send it to specialists for restoration. In the meantime, the investigators checked all cases of missing Latina women from recent decades, but none matched the description of the discovered woman. It seemed that no one was even searching for the unfortunate woman. Normally, investigations in such a case begin by gathering information about the person, whom she was friends with, whom she associated with, and what she did. But in this case, the police had no information. The investigators decided to begin their inquiry with the house in which the tank was found. The house had been built in 1959. In the last 30 years, it had had 6 owners. It turned out that before the man who found the tank, 3 different families had lived there, successful families with children and no trouble with the law. The investigators were puzzled. It was unlikely that a homeowner would leave a tank with such contents in his basement even temporarily. While reviewing the case files, the investigator realized that everything he needed to solve the case was right before him, in the tank itself. His attention was first drawn to the markings on the tank, including the inscription RIM New Jersey. It turned out that RIM was a factory that manufactured tanks. The investigator went to the plant, where an employee explained that federal law requires all tanks produced there to be labeled, since many are used to store toxic substances, and that the tanks can be traced by their numbers. Each number has a meaning. 55 stands for a 55-gallon tank, 3 indicates the steel wall's thickness. 363 means the tank was manufactured in March '60. The green sticker on the tank was the brand of a chemical company that had previously bought these tanks. The investigator learned that this chemical company was sold in the 1970s and that the green paint used on the tanks was discontinued then. The small balls found in the barrel were used for injection molding, melted and processed into toy soldiers, chairs, and plastic flowers. These connections gave the police important clues. It is suspected that the woman ended up in the tank sometime between 1960, the year the barrel was made, and 1970, when green paint production ceased. Most likely, the perpetrator either worked at the plastics factory that used green paint or had access to it, but one could spend a lot of time searching for a worker 30 years later and find no one. In the meantime, the notebook found in the tank was examined. Using modern infrared technology, experts were able to recover information from the erased pages, and almost vanished entries became visible again. The investigators had the clue to the woman's identity right in front of them. On the inside of the cover, they saw a number preceded by the letter A. It was assumed that the woman was Spanish and that this could be her registration number, since every immigrant to America is assigned a number. And it looked as though this number belonged to her. The investigator contacted the Immigration and Naturalization Service and requested the data for the person with that number. After verification, he received the name and a photo of the woman. That is how they learned her identity. Her name was Reina Angelica Mariquin, a 25-year-old woman who had arrived in America from El Salvador in August '66. The investigators did not know what dream Reina had been pursuing, but it was important to find out who had thwarted her plans. In the next few days, the investigator called every number in Reina's address book. After calling nearly everyone on the list, he dialed the last number, which belonged to a company in Manhattan's Garment District. A woman answered. The investigator explained his reason for calling, and she agreed to speak with him. Her name was Kathy Andrade. She had worked at that company since the early '60s and knew Reina well. When Kathy saw Reina's picture, she immediately began to cry and said, "Oh my God," and then she collapsed. The investigator nodded, and Kathy told him the story she had kept to herself for 30 years. New York City, 1967. Kathy and Reina met in a Catholic church in Manhattan. When Kathy heard Reina speak, she approached and asked, "Are you by any chance from El Salvador?" Reina replied, "Yes." Kathy said she was too. The women hit it off immediately and became friends. Reina told Kathy she was divorced and had come to New York the previous year to start a new life. She worked in a downtown factory and lived in a Catholic boarding house for young. Reina always smiled and was very curious. At church, she had a good reputation and all the parishioners loved her. Every day after work, Reina studied English. The friends saw each other almost every day and talked about everything that happened during the day. But Reina kept returning to her favorite topic, her boyfriend. She was in love, but she did not even tell her friend his name. The investigators learned from Kathy that he was married, since Reina only saw him on certain days. Kathy worried and said, "Be careful, you could get pregnant," to which Reina replied, "I am already pregnant, we will manage. My boyfriend said he will leave his wife and rent an apartment." Reina's mysterious boyfriend kept his promise. He rented an apartment and advised Reina to quit her job because he feared it could harm the baby. Kathy thought at the time that he simply did not want anyone to know about her situation. Since he was married, after they moved in together, Kathy and Raina communicated every week, and if Raina did not call her, Kathy called Raina. Raina seemed very happy, for in every conversation Kathy learned that her boyfriend would soon leave his wife. The boyfriend took Raina to doctor's appointments every month, was kind to her, brought her food and everything else she needed. Kathy had the impression that things were going well for her friend. One evening, at the end of the workday at Kathy's company, the telephone rang. Kathy picked up and heard the voice of her friend Raina. She was excited and nervous. Through tears, Raina told Kathy, "I have seen his wife," and then began to repeat, "He threatened me. Everything he said was a lie." Raina was 8 months pregnant. Tired of waiting for the man to repeat the same lies, she decided to tell them herself. After coming to her senses a little, Raina told Kathy she had called the boyfriend's wife and told her everything. In response, he called Raina and said he was very angry with her. Kathy dropped everything and hurried to her friend's apartment. When she arrived, she saw that the door was open. She entered and called out for Raina several times, but there was no answer. When she entered the room, Kathy saw a pair of shoes on the floor. In the kitchen, food was on the table and still warm. Kathy ran immediately to the police. They listened to her story but refused to file a report because several hours had passed. The police knew that married men often eloped with their pregnant lovers, and no one wanted to investigate Raina's disappearance. But Kathy knew her friend was in trouble. She returned to work and kept calling Raina's number, but no one answered. Kathy could find nowhere to go in her worry and thought about Raina every day. She did not know whom to turn to for help. She did not know Raina's family in El Salvador or where they lived. Since then, Kathy never heard from Raina again, but she always knew something had happened to her. After their conversation, Kathy gave the investigators the address of the Catholic boarding house where Raina had lived. The boarding house still had records showing Raina's residence. The investigators learned when she moved in and when she moved out. According to Kathy, Raina left the boarding house when she was 2 or 3 months pregnant, but was found when she was 8 months pregnant. Raina thus ended up in March or April '67 in the basement cell. The investigators then learned that Raina's boyfriend was married. These were also the 3 previous owners of the house where the tank was found. Land records showed that the wing of the house where the tank was stored was missing from the original plans. That extension had been built in the 1980s. Perhaps that is why the tank ended up in the basement. It remains to be determined who exactly built the addition. Thus, the investigators located the second owner of the house, Stan Miller. Miller said he had moved into the house in 1972 and then discovered that the addition was illegal. In 1980, he obtained a permit from the municipality and secured all necessary papers. Miller added that he knew about the tank, but thought it had been left over from the construction work and paid it no mind. He advised the investigators to speak with a man named Howard Elkins, who had lived in the house before him. After researching Elkins's background, the investigators learned that he was 40 years old at the time Raina was in the barrel. He was married, raised 3 children, and was a law-abiding citizen. But one thing was notable. Thanks to his father-in-law making him a partner in the plastics products firm, Elkins had a successful career. On the floor of the tank, they had found a plastic film and green paint. The first owner of the house had operated a company that made such items, including flowers dyed with green paint. Elkins had worked in that plant for almost 20 years alongside his father-in-law and another partner named Melvin Ganton. After the company closed in the 70s, Elkins sold his house and moved with his family to Florida. The investigators traveled there to speak with Elkins, but first decided to verify their suspicion by locating his former partner Ganton, who also lived in Florida. The first thing Ganton was shown was the tank. He immediately said, "Yes, these are the kind of tanks you use to store green paint." He also identified the marbles found in the tank. When questioned about his former partner, Ganton explained that Howard was skilled with machinery and was a very strong and tough man. Ganton also stated that Elkins had a mistress, a young Hispanic woman with long black hair and gold teeth. The investigators realized Ganton was describing Raina. He did not know her name, but recalled she had worked at the plant for about a year. One day she simply did not show up for work and was never seen again. Ganton also remembered something else odd. An angry call from the landlord in New Jersey where Elkins had rented an apartment for Raina. The landlord said that if Howard did not pay the rent, he would throw all her belongings onto the street. Ganton delivered the message to Elkins, who immediately got into his car and drove away. That evening, he returned with a television and a suitcase. Although Ganton had not understood what was happening at the time, investigators 30 years later were certain that Elkins had removed all of Raina's belongings from her apartment, and that Raina herself was already in the tank in his basement. On September 9, 1999, 7 days after the mortal remains of 25-year-old Raina Angelica Marroquin were found in a tank under her house on Long Island, the investigators stood on the doorstep of Howard Elkins's house in Florida. When Elkins saw the police, he appeared shocked. For 33 minutes, Howard Elkins told them he had never seen that tank or its contents. The investigators asked, "Have you met the woman who worked at the plant?" Elkins answered, "Yes, I dated one, but that was a long time ago and the affair didn't last. When my father-in-law found out, he told me to end it immediately, and Elkins said he had done so. When asked the woman's name, he said he could not remember it. The investigators showed him pictures of Raina, but he said he had never met her. The officers then told him, 'We are certain you are the one who disposed of the woman and placed her in the tank.'" Suddenly, the conversation was interrupted by a phone call from Elkins's wife. During the call, Elkins said nothing about the investigators' visit. After he hung up, he told the investigators they must leave. In Florida, they had no authority and no arrest warrant, but as they left, they warned him, "We're coming back soon with an arrest warrant for you." Before they even reached their cars, one investigator called his superior and requested a warrant for Howard Elkins. On September 10, the officers received a call from the Florida State Police informing them that Elkins's wife had filed a missing person report for her husband, who had left early that morning without taking his wallet. The Florida police began searching every possible location. 45 minutes later, he was found dead in his best friend's garage. His friend was on vacation. Elkins was sitting in the back seat of the owner's car. The investigators had no doubt. Howard Elkins knew it was time to answer for his deed. Instead, he chose to end his life and thus avoid a trial. The New York City labs compared Elkins's DNA with that of Raina Marroquin's baby, and it was a match. Raina's body had spent 30 years in the tank while Elkins lived a quiet life and raised 3 children. Kathy, Raina's friend, still blames herself and says, "For years I thought if I had come 5 or 10 minutes earlier, Raina would still be alive." The police located Raina's family. Her mother had no idea what had become of her daughter or where to look for her. Raina was returned to El Salvador and buried in the family grave. Raina's mother died shortly thereafter and was buried next to her daughter. Thank you for watching and take care.